Hi, and welcome to That's Entertainment, the weekly entertainment show where we look at all the interesting news from last week, this week. Kicking off with some news from Netflix. It was made very clear last week that the appeal of day-and-date film releases on streaming services and to their subscribers is a highly valuable proposition. Netflix CEO Greg Peters told a virtual session at Morgan Stanley's Technology, Media and Telecom conference that consumer choice should dominate decisions. We've been supporting simultaneous release for a long time and maybe shorter theatrical windows. So I would say we're enthusiastic to see a shift in enabling more and more of that. At the end of the day, it's hard to buck that trend for too long, and I think that's eventually where things will go. According to research from The Hollywood Reporter, US adults are willing to pay between $13 and $17 per month for a streaming service that includes new movies. 90% of the respondents who subscribe to HBO Max said they were more than likely to purchase a subscription to a streaming service if it included new film releases, the same day that they are in cinemas at no extra cost. Meanwhile, 64% of people who are not HBO subscribers said the same thing. And this is significant. There is a debate raging across the economics of film releases that the current shift towards streaming platforms will mean that there will be less opportunity for large blockbusters to be created because of the sheer expense of such formats. Jeff Ullin has released a very interesting article debating this back and forth. Jeff Ullin published a series of books on the industry of distribution, comparing distributors to VCs. And his contention is that if we're moving towards this future, the revenues that are justified through streaming services will be greatly impacted, or the revenue potential for films that will be going through streaming services only will be greatly impacted. That you need the theatrical launch to justify the audience interest and sales of tickets as the value driver for the film before it hits the home entertainment window. We might also be looking at a future where the risks associated with making a new blockbuster franchise are deemed to be too high because there's no way to justify the revenue, particularly as the film or TV show starts to disappear into the model of SVOD. So, interesting debate to be had. I think as Dominic, or aka Scriptfella, said in our webinar last week, it'll be a fertile breeding ground for the middle tier films, which have been largely in decline because the economics haven't stacked up with theatrical releases as the main revenue driver for these types of movies. I think that's going to swap. I think the big question now is, what do we do with blockbusters? Warner Media, well aware of the appeal and perceived value of the simultaneous US release of all 2021 Warner Brothers movies on the HBO Max streaming service. It was announced this week that those releases will be the only content lacking from the lower price ad-supported AVOD version of the HBO Max platform. And that will be launching later in June this year in the US. Warner Media Chief Jason Kilar revealed that HBO Max already has around $80 million lined up in advertising commitment for the new service. AVOD going to be no great savior for blockbuster movie making. $80 million is a drop in the ocean in that industry, so long way to go there. But again, great for small and mid-tier movies, so probably going to see a boon in production in that line of storytelling. Kilar also announced HBO Max is set to launch in 60 countries outside of the US this year, 39 territories in Latin America, Caribbean in late June, and another 21 in Europe in the second half of the year. Total subscribers are expected to reach 120 million to 150 million globally by 2025, with half of that in the US and half overseas. Back to Netflix, some interesting news about subscriptions has been announced by the streaming mega giant. The service is now looking to limit password sharing, which is an action which is against its terms of service. So you'll probably start to see, if you're sharing an account with someone, messages popping up asking you if you're living with the owner of this account. And in order to justify that, you'll have to log in and reconfirm through an email or a text message. At the moment, there's an option for verifying later, which does give audiences some time to switch over, but it's obvious that this move will be coming across the service globally very shortly. This is perceived probably as a good thing by Wall Street. Yahoo Finance and bank securities analyst Nat Schindler recently said, "We view any potential password crackdowns as a tailwind, and Netflix is in a strong position to continue price increases into 2021. Schindler didn't estimate how much of a potential subscriber lift Netflix would receive by the clampdown, but he cited that from a Bank of America survey, out of 1,000 US adults, 26% of the respondents shared passwords with another household, which technically as I mentioned before, is in violation of Netflix's service. So if that's 26% globally, and let's say 5%, 6% actually then switch to the paid service as a result of losing access to that shared password, that's a massive jump for Netflix. Netflix also announced some very significant deals. They unveiled plans for the Spanish sequel to their hugely successful US movie Bird Box, with Deadline reporting that this could be the first of a multiple local language Bird Box spin-offs. If so, this is yet another example of a streaming service realizing the appeal to audiences of a familiar franchise. Well, very, very interesting. And I think yields itself to the idea that now all streaming services are going to be looking for their Sopranos, their Game of Thrones franchises that can essentially be, repeated from a seasonal perspective, but also potentially spun off into, lots of mini-series as a result of that. And finally, Apple announced a significant production deal of their own. They've just signed a first look deal with Ron Howard and Brian Grazier from the well-respected, multi-award winning Imagine Entertainment. The deal reflects Apple's previously stated policy of cultivating a smaller content pool than its rivals and will instead focus on product from Hollywood A-listers. In the last 12 months, they've also signed deals with Martin Scorsese, Idris Elba, and Leonardo DiCaprio. They must be spending a lot of money on production, but in a very, very focused way, and I think that's quite a smart move. If Netflix is going for replacing TV as we know it today with lots of casual programming, Apple's focus remaining on quality, I think that's an interesting step. Obviously, a lot depends on how good the content is, but there's some great talent being lined up there. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to our show. Remember, we're publishing both to LinkedIn and to YouTube, and we'll be back with more news shortly. Goodbye.